my name is Beth and I'm the sewing pattern designer and blogger at Sew DIY. Last week I showed you how to thread a serger, and this week I'm going to show you how to get perfect thread tension. Now the tricky thing about sergers is that every time you use a different kind of fabric, there's the potential that you're going to need to change your thread tension. So before you start sewing your garment, it's really important to dial in that thread tension. So the other tricky thing about sergers is that you're going to be using 3 to 4 threads, and each of those threads has a tension dial. So if your tension is a little bit wonky, it could be any of these dials. And it can sometimes be kind of hard to identify which thread or which dial you need to move. So your best friend in identifying which dial you're going to need to move is your machine manual. Yes, this is probably sitting somewhere in a drawer gathering dust, but before you start sewing your next project, you need to get this out and turn to this page. So before you start sewing a project, you're going to want to get a scrap of fabric and do a little test run. Then look at those stitches and compare it here and see if your scrap of fabric matches any of these images. And if it does, then you can use one of the suggestions there on how to adjust the thread tension on your machine. Now, the other important thing is that you want to move only one dial at a time. If you move 2 dials and then do a test run and it still doesn't work, you're not going to know which dial is the culprit and didn't work. So just trust me, it's kind of annoying. It feels like it's going to take longer, but just move one dial at a time. See if that corrects the thread tension issue. If it doesn't, maybe move that dial a little more or try moving a different dial. It takes a lot of trial and error, but it's really worth it to make sure that you're going to have a beautifully sewn garment. Let's get started. So whenever I start a project, I grab some scraps of the fabric that I'm using for that project, and I do a test run, and then look at the fabric to see what's looking good and what's looking wrong, consult my manual, and see where I might adjust it to get better thread tension. So here I have an example that's pretty good thread tension. This is something I would be happy with. So we can see this is the right side. We see our upper looper thread on the right side and our 2 rows of needle thread. And then on the back, we see our lower looper thread, and we don't really see our needle threads. This would be an ideal look for your serger tension thread. So let's start with the needle tension. If the needle tension in either of these needles is too tight, then your fabric is going to get a little bunched up. Like it'll actually look like the thread is pulling it tight and you see a little bit of gathering. If these tension dials are too loose, then you're going to see one of these threads on the back side of the fabric. And it might be a little hard to see in this example, but you can kind of see the little loops of the thread on the back side. So just like when you were sewing with a conventional machine, ideally your needle thread will loop right in the middle of your 2 fabrics and not be visible on the wrong side or the back side. So now let's talk about the loopers. I feel like I spend most of my time adjusting the tension on the loopers. And I have some examples here about when the tension is off. So this first one, the tension is too loose on the upper looper, and you actually see it on both sides of the fabric. The tricky thing is this could also mean that the lower looper tension is too tight and it's pulling the upper looper over to the other side. So what you're going to need to do is adjust one of them and see if it makes a change in the fabric. And then if it doesn't, change it, do another adjustment, test it again. And if you're having problems remembering what adjustments you're making, you can just snap a photo with your camera phone. For this next example, I made the loopers really tight. So in this one, I've made the upper looper tight, and you can almost see how on the front side of the stitching, it's almost bowing in on itself a little bit, and it's pulling the lower loopers towards the front side, and it's even pulling the left needle thread. In this example, I made the lower looper really tight, and you can see that the upper looper is on the front and the back, and it's also pulling that left needle thread. So when it's too tight, you'll need to move to a lower number. So don't be discouraged if it takes you a little bit of time and a little bit of trial and error. It's not super easy, but the more that you'll practice with it, the more you'll get comfortable. I hope that you found that video helpful. Let me know in the comments what you learned today, and let me know if you have any special requests for future videos that you'd like to see. I have a lot more of these planned, so make sure to hit the subscribe button below and then click the bell so that you're notified every time a new video releases. Happy sewing!